So we get a lot of questions about how Angular works together with Grails and REST APIs and how we build these applications and how they work together. So here's an example application. It's called Streamer. I'm going to start it up right now. And here we can clearly see that we are querying against 8080, right? So 8080 is a typical Java port. And that means that what we see right here, oh, this is Teckle even. What is this? Madness. Why is there Teckle running? Oh, I think maybe I know. Wait a second. Here we go. Streamer. It was just me having a tunnel open. Never mind, guys. Okay. So here we have Streamer running on port 8080. So 8080 means this is something where the application, the Java application, is being talked to, and it responds with an HTML. So if we open up the network, we see we can clearly see, if we go to all, right, and we reload, we can see what it is that the server responds with, which is this right here, this first document. And this document right here, as you can see, has some HTML, right? But very little HTML. It only has 124 lines of HTML. Additionally, you can see things like, well, it has this form and stuff. So here, everything that we see on the screen is actually being rendered out, right? Everything we see on the screen, so we have a form with a label and a div. And so what we see here is very classic. It's the classical server response HTML, all right? But once we log in, magic starts to happen. And this is what Angular does. So let's clear this console and let's log in. So now we get redirected, and we get redirected onto this page here, this localhost page. And this localhost page again returns HTML. It again has pretty few lines. It has only 240 lines of code. But here, if we searched for example, for the string discover shows, let's do that right here. So let's do Control F and let's look for discover. Already we don't find anything, right? So maybe it's an uppercase issue. Let's see, discover nothing. So we don't find the stuff that is actually on this page. We don't find any of this. So what's going on here? Why is that the case? Well, really what we see here is a very, very basic HTML that Google can index. So this is the most basic HTML that we render out with just the Java application, which in this case here, let's see what it does. So it has a logo that it renders out, which is probably this right up here, the streamer. And then there's a spinner right here. So it has some spinner logic. And then we have some browser genre that are being rendered out by the server. And then we have a nav bar, which is doing some sort of which was an input, and probably that's this right here, this question, the search bar right here, and some LIs. And then already we have nothing more. And this is the magical thing. This UI view is where the magic happens. Because on line 117, in reality, this here is populated with all of this right here, all of this in the middle. So let's give you an example. If this page, this settings page, let's reload and let's check to just make sure that I'm saying the truth. This page renders out the localhost HTML. And the localhost HTML, again, it's the same thing. It's the same thing that we just saw with the logo and then this LI with the input. And then right here, this magical UI view. But there's a bunch of stuff here. There's settings. Again, I cannot search for Control F settings in here. It doesn't work. Oh, well, apparently it finds some JS files. But it doesn't find this H1 up here. But if I go inspect, I can see it. It's right here, settings. Right? So the HTML is there. And what we can furthermore see, we can see right here something called UI view. That is, if you remember, the very same one that we just saw right here. UI view. Where was it? Here. So this UI view is the same as this, and then it gets expanded with a bunch of stuff. It gets expanded, it gets, like a lot of stuff gets input here, or maybe, you know what, actually, I think it's this UI view. And then we have this div inside of it with this admin stuff. And then we have this nav bar on the left with the ULs and the LIs, the different ones. And all of a sudden, we have all this HTML that does not come from the server directly. It comes from somewhere else. And that is why I've made sure to tell you guys, or tell you in this case, Steve, that localhost 8080, that is the one that the server takes care of. Everything after that, preceded by this hash symbol, everything after that is JavaScript generated. So Angular in this case looks for this HTML tag called UIView, which is not a valid HTML tag. It doesn't exist actually in the HTML world, but this is something that was created for Angular, where it looks for a UI view and then it populates that UI view with HTML based on, so this is important, it populates it with HTML based on the current URL. So we can look for this URL in our code and find the specific view that is connected with this URL. So where do we find this? Where do we find this? Well, first of all, let's look at where do we find it for the server, because there are some things that even the server renders out. For instance, what does the server render out? The server renders out, let's look at some network stuff here. Let's look for XHR, right? So we have some JSON stuff. So here, for instance, the settings JSON is returned. Now this is something that the server takes care of. How do we see this? Well, most easily we see it by that there's no hashtag in between, right? So it just says localhost 8080 settings JSON. If we query this in the browser tab, we see that what we get is a big JSON object, or actually an array, a big JSON array that contains these 10 elements or what it is. All right, so this is actually something that the server takes care of. The server takes care of rendering this JSON. At the same time as the server can render stuff, such as JSON, also the front end can render stuff, such as with these hashtag prefixes and these URLs. And both are called routes. So this is a route. Somewhere it is configured that this settings JSON endpoint displays this JSON, this array, and also somewhere it is configured that this hashtag settings renders this HTML right here, right? So we have two systems in place in parallel, and that is important to understand, and it's difficult to understand. So let's first look at the one side, which is the more easy side, which is the simple JavaScript rendering with just a template and a controller, the MVC, but from the front end. So let's look for this route, settings, and find out where this view comes from. All right. How do we find Angular views? Angular views are found usually, well, this is a convention thing, but we have it always in something called routes. So there's usually a file or multiple files called something routes. In this case, it's prefixed by the project name. So in this case, it would be streamer.routes.js. This is a convention. If you have more modules, there are more complex applications where you would have sub-modules, and then each module has its own routes. But in this case, all of the routes for Streamer are all in one file. So here we have these routes, and they are a specific route configured by state provider. So the state provider receives a method called state. This state method is called with a string that is the name of the route, the name of the state, and then an object with configuration. Now let's find our settings. Setting/settings. Okay, we can't find it like this. Maybe there's another way to find it. Let's just look for settings for now, and let's see how we... All right, there's something here we can see. So we can see a settings.settings pointing to settings. So this is a little bit complicated now. Actually, you know what? Let's look at a better one, because this is weird with the settings. That takes a different edge case. Let's look for settings users. I think that's easier. So settings users. How do we find settings users? Well, maybe this is a clue, right? We have a state called settings.users. It is not settings/users, but it is settings.users. That means that there is a route called settings, which we can find some. We'll have to look for it, but there's some state called settings, and this is a subroute. So okay. So we found the state. I'm going to talk about subroutes later on a little bit, but let's just assume that this is a state and we found the state. So here we have all the configuration needed to build up this page. So this is the configuration that is internally used to find out, based on the URL, settings/users, which template it should use and which controller it should use. And here we are. Those are the two things. So basically, each state configuration combines a URL with a template and a controller. And if you want some fluff on top, right? But let's ignore the fluff. Let's just go for the three things that are together. It's a URL, it's a template, and it's a controller. Okay, so what are these three different things? Well, a controller has logic for a certain view. You know about scope. It puts stuff on the scope. It puts methods on the scope. It puts variables on the scope. And everything that is on the scope is exposed to the template. All right, so typical model view controller. A controller, in the true sense of the word, controls the output, the variables, the scope of the view. All right, so far so good?
Yes.
All right. Then we have the HTML file. So if we just shift, right? This is IntelliJ stuff. Shift settings HTML, and then we find this file. See, it even omits the TPL and stuff, so it's pretty smart about it. Okay, so we have the settings user file, the template now, and it is this template that is being rendered. Let's double check to make sure that this is true. We have an H1 called users. Let's see. There's an H1 called users. Seems good so far. Then there are two buttons on the right. Let's see if we can find those. Two buttons. There's a pull right here, button group, pull right, and two buttons. Great. Invite user via email, create user, invite user via email, create user. Okay, so I think we found the template. We found the template that is being rendered in here. And so if you want to make adjustments, you can just adjust it in this template now. So I've adjusted it. Like, let me just scroll to the bottom. It's nothing of importance, and then I reload, and then it should now have an exclamation point behind the users. All right, and there we've made our first adjustment. So we found, based on the route, or based on the URL, we found the template, and based on this template, or based on this state block, the state configuration block, we can find template and controller. All right, so here we've made an adjustment to the template. Let's make a quick adjustment to the controller, just to make sure. So what's an example? Okay, so here, for instance, it loads some user list, and then once it's done, it says loading equals false, right? So let's keep loading at true, and then it should constantly show us a spinner. And right? Do you understand this logic? So there's some loading variable, it sets it to true. All right, and so when it's done, it sets it to false. And that we just changed that. So now it's just for debugging, right? But now when we reload, it should like constantly show us this loader. And there we have it, right? So it's showing us this loading thing now all the time, even though it's already done loading. So it makes no sense. But now we know at least we can also manipulate this. So this is how you find controller and template based on a URL. Okay, any questions so far?
Not so far.
Okay. Wait a second. All right. So this is how you find it based on a URL. So I was going to talk about this whole sub-state thing. Let's go for a more simple example to illustrate. So if we go on dashboard, oh, okay, wait, we have to do this. Data streamer. Apparently we have to do this. Is the only one? That's the only one. And then the streamer title. All right. So this is the only stuff. So I think now I can go, no? Oh, what happened? The streamer, did I not save? Validate and then save. And then dashboard. Ah, good. Okay, I can be on dashboard. So this is a more simple example, right? So if we want to look for this dash thing, and we want to find the template that belongs to dash and the controller that belongs to dash, easiest way to do it is to always go, if you don't know if there's any convention being followed in this project or whatever, the easiest way to go is looking for this URL in the routes again. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to go into the routes file. Here we have it. We're going to look for dash. Here's some state go. We don't want those. Here is the state block. Again, we found it pretty easily. It says dash, and it says /dash as the URL. Unfortunately, again, we have some added complexity to it. There's some parameters. Let me again hold you over by saying we're going to talk about parameters later on. For now, let's just ignore the parameters. Let's think about it as though it would say like this. So we have a state dash, a URL dash, pointing to streamer-htm, a controller of dash controller. All right. Quick tip: with control click, you can go right into these files. For this, a prerequisite, but that's a necessity for our kind of work, is the Angular plugin. So under plugins, you would find the AngularJS plugin. So browse repositories, and then AngularJS, and then write it right here, and then you install it. It has 1.5 million downloads, so it's easy to find. And that's if you install that and restart the IntelliJ, you can do things like, just control click on these strings, and it knows that there's actually a controller behind and stuff. It's pretty smart about it. All right. So here we found the dash controller. Same thing, right? We have a dash controller, and let's go for this string here and look for the HTML file. And again, it found a dash TPL HTML. All right. So here we have this entire dash, which, what does it have? It has a new releases. It has a continue watching. It has a recommendations. Now it's important to note that these are all translated strings. So we probably will not find this discover shows as it says here inside of this file. No, that we do not do. Instead, what we find is, what would that be? Discover shows, recommendations. I guess it would be here, discover shows, which is a translation string. So I can actually just control click on this, discover shows, and find it in our translation files. Now, as you can see, there are a bunch of translations. There's French, and there's Korean, and there's Norwegian, and it's just because this is a pretty popular project on GitHub, and people have contributed. So actually what you can do is you can go into your profile and change it to, like, I don't know, let's go for Korean, right? And then we save this profile, and all of a sudden we have it in Korean, the entire thing. So that's pretty cool, right? So that's why you do not find hard-coded discover shows, but that's all right. Wait, I have to find myself now. Well, let's, I don't know. Okay, Netherlands, and then English. all right. Okay, so we're back to English. But yeah, so these are just like translated strings, but it's still, this is a lot more, as you can see, than was before. And again, if we compare the output that we get, let's reload the page, the output that we get directly from the server, that is very, very little in comparison. So that is only up to UI view, basically. Only this top header and then nothing. So this entire inner content is handled by this dash TPL. So this dash TPL, because I wanted to talk to you about substates. So this dash TPL is actually just a regular old state. It is just one single string, nothing added to it. Same goes for player, same goes for profile, same goes for help. So let's make an example out of it. Let's go on to help, FAQ. So here we have a help page, and the help page is just another simple route, meaning the help page has just, it doesn't even, yeah, it does. Okay, so it has a controller, which, what does it do? It has a go to anchor method and some questions, and right, it's a pretty simple controller, doesn't have much. And then we have the help HTML, which if we go into that, shift help HTML, okay, then we get to the template file. And then here we have the navigation on the left, and then we have a spinner, and then this heading, and then all of these questions repeated, question in questions. So these are apparently repeated. So this is nothing that's hard coded either. All right, so this is a simple state. So note the difference. I'd like you to note the difference between a simple state and a substate. So let's take, for instance, an admin and then admin.filemanager, right? So there's a difference here. The dot annotation means something to the state provider. The state provider looks for dots and assumes that then file manager or admin file manager is a child state, a substate of admin. What is this good for? What is the purpose of this? Well, there are multiple purposes. Purpose number one, any URL declared here is then nested under admin, right? So it's like a folder system, basically. So you start out with admin, and then you say, okay, there's a file manager under it, admin.filemanager, which creates the URL /admin/filemanager. Let's look if this is true. Let's go into manage content. Let's go into file manager, and there we have it, /admin/filemanager. Even though in the route itself, we can only see /filemanager. So this is done with this dot annotation, with this substate handling. That's only the one advantage, though. What's the next advantage? The next advantage is that these parent states, they can have their own template and their own controller. And these are sort of global for all of the child states. So here we have multiple child states. We have file manager, we have movie, we have movies, we have videos, we have video, and all of these are nested under admin. And all of these kind of inherit this template and this controller. So what exactly does that mean for our visual stuff? Well, it means that the file manager doesn't have to have all of this stuff that all of these need. So if I go into notifications, you can see the left side stays the same. We can go onto other videos or movies, and the left side stays the same. It doesn't change based on the movies. Only the selection changes, but not really the HTML. The HTML doesn't change. The markup, the structure of the HTML. So this is something that we can inherit down to all child states, so that they can only have to take care of themselves, right? Single responsibility. So that this shows HTML, this template, only needs to take care of its own content, which is the show's content. Let's illustrate that by looking at the admin HTML. So if what I'm saying is correct, the admin HTML should pretty much only include like this wrapper thingy, with the left side being the navigation, and then a middle content where it says, and now put stuff here. Whatever you want to render, put it in this content, right? That's how it would be. So let's see if that's true. We go into the admin HTML. By the way, I'm going to talk about the whole TPL and why there's always this TPL in between. That's Grails specific. So this is nothing that's Angular specific. So I'll talk about that later. Okay, so the admin HTML, or the admin template file, as I've said, has one wrapper admin div, and then one navigation on the left, which contains all of the navigation points, right? So TV shows, movies, other videos, file manager. Let's look at them. TV shows, movie, other files, file manager. So it's, it's those menu entries. And then it has one admin content section, which is this right section, where it says, and now put stuff here. Again, we encounter this UI view again. So if everything should be right, if we inspect this right now, we should see two UI views. Let's see if this is correct. We should see the main UI view. Here's the main UI view with the entire admin being rendered into it. And inside of admin content, we have another UI view. And that takes care of this content. All right? So far, so good?
Yes.
All right. So how does it know what to put in there? Well, this is based on this child state handling. If you have a parent state, let's call it a parent and a child state, all right? If you have a parent state, and in that parent state, you have an HTML file where you declare UI view, and you do not have any child states, this will always stay empty. There's never anything that goes in there. A nested UI view is only ever triggered and action happens when you actually have a child state. Similarly, if you have a child state and you remove the UI view, whatever HTML you specify here, this template, has no place to be rendered into. It doesn't know where it should go. Best case scenario, nothing shows up. Worst case scenario, you get a JavaScript exception. Let's see. Let's remove the UI view out of admin template and let's see what happens. I reload the page, and as expected, nothing gets rendered. But we do not get an exception, which maybe is not even that great, right? Maybe we should even be like told you've declared a child state and there's not even any place to render this template. So maybe it's actually a little bit lacking that we don't get some sort of warning, but all right, we didn't get a warning. There's just nothing that gets rendered. And since we removed it out of the template of the parent template, none of them will render now. Whether I go, doesn't matter which one I go into, none of them will render now. But note this though. I believe, and let's see if this is true, the controller is still initialized. Because the controller doesn't need the template. The controller is just logic, and the logic is initialized. The controller just points, puts variables and methods onto the scope and offers them to the template. But if there's no template to use those variables, the controller doesn't care. It still is initialized, I believe. So let's see if that's true. Let's make a console log. This is just a colored console log. And let's call it just the same as this controller, admin file manager controller. And now if I reload the page, I'm hoping that I'll see this log. Well, I'm in the wrong page. I have to go in the admin file manager. Admin file manager. And nothing. Interesting. So my assumption was wrong. Actually, when there's no place to render this template, when there's no place to render the state into, this console log cannot be run. So this entire controller is never run. It's interesting. I didn't know this. So let's put this UI view back in place, and now we should get the output, right? Let's see. And there we have
Yes.
the output. All right. So it wasn't as I expected it, but things do work internally in a certain way, right? The controller actually is not initialized. So what I said is wrong. The controller is not initialized, but everything depends on this parent having a UI view. All right. So going back to our initial example where I said this is a bit complicated and let's look at that later, let's go with that settings example and see if we can find the logic here. So this settings.settings has a URL of settings, but it inherits from the parent state settings the other piece settings, which is why in the end it is /settings/settings. Or in the case of user, this settings.users is actually the URL is /users, but we know it inherits from settings. So the final URL is /settings/users. All right?
Yes.
Okay. Now this can go on and on, right? You can theoretically, you could go on and on and on. You could say, okay, so you make another one, which is like the show, and then I don't know, some sort of detail or whatever, and then this has like a detail/detail, and then the URL that's put together is /admin/show, then some ID, then /detail, and this would get rendered in that URL, what I just said. That again requires that in this template, in this admin show template, there's another UI view, right? So you understand how this maybe how you can nest it as deep as you want, but you just have to be always clear to write this UI view and to set a place for it. Otherwise, the HTML doesn't know where to go. Okay. So this is how you find your way around, the Angular side of this routing. And actually, we do not use Angular routing. We do not use the Angular router. What we use is the UI router. So it's a plugin UI router, which is a lot better than the vanilla router. The vanilla router also, it works okay, but it doesn't have states, it doesn't have nesting, it doesn't have a lot of fancy stuff that we have come to, just use on a daily basis. And you can see 13,000 stars. I mean, this is a very, very popular plugin. So very, very good job that they did here. And so this is what we're using. And they have like tutorials and stuff, so you can dig in there a little bit. There are some examples also, AngularJS, and then, yeah, let's see. Right, so they describe a little bit with the UI view, and then having the route, I think, hello state and about state, and they do like this, right? So they extract them as variables and then put them in here, basically the same as what we did. Yeah, all right, and then they have a live demo in here where you can click on about, and then you see what it gets. This hashtag, and then about, and then hello, and then you get hashtag hello, and it renders the specific template file. In this case, it isn't a template URL, it is just an inline template. So it's just some inline HTML. We don't ever opt for this option because it's just never enough for a full stack application. This is good for an example, right? But a real application, you don't want to just render some HTML. You want to always point to a HTML file. All right. Any questions so far?
Not so far.
Good. So now let's talk about Grails. How does Grails routing work, and how does it work together with Angular? So Grails routing, let's look for the very, very most simple thing. The simplest thing is this document. When I just go on localhost 8080, this document that we've looked at so many times now. So let's go and let's look at this. So we have all, and let's reload. So this very, very first HTML document that's rendered out, where does it come from? Where is the specified? Where does it come from? So Grails has something called the URL mapping. The URL mappings are a Groovy file where you can specify which URL points to which internal GSP or view, which controller, which view with method. So it's basically the same as the streamer routes or as the UI router, as these states, except that there's one little thing that makes things just a little bit easier. which is this block right here. But before we talk about this block right here, which is kind of a dynamic, cool block, before we talk about that, let's talk about this one. This one is a very, very specific route. It says when you enter the slash, and the slash is your URL, so, meaning nothing behind it, just localhost, just your base URL, then please render out the view index. So internally, there's some keyword. There's a view keyword that means something. And there are even more keywords. Let me show you some more. There's an action keyword where you can type in an action. There's a controller keyword where you can type in a controller. And there's, I think, even a URI keyword. URI. Yeah, there's even a URI keyword. So I think I could even say, like, I want to point it to like http google.com or something. I think then it's a redirect. I know. But let's look at these three in particular. Let's look at view, let's look at action, let's look at controller. So if I wanted to point my URL, to a specific controller action combination. So controller action combination is Grails side now. Yeah, this is not Angular anymore. This is just Grails. That means I would want to point it to some controller action. Let's go, for instance, for this user controller. And then this index method would apparently find all by, so it renders out a list of users. So what if I enter my URL in the URL, I want to then get a list of users. What I could do is I could say, okay, I want to point it to user controller. I actually get code completion here. See, user. And I want to point it to the index method. So now I specified very specifically, a little bit like this, a little bit like saying a specific controller, the template is something else, but a specific controller for a URL, a little bit like that. I'm saying my specific URL, I want to point it to this controller method. And also here I can control click it into it, and I can jump right into that method.
Okay.
All right. So now if I enter, I might have to reload, I'm not sure, or restart the application. If I enter my URL, okay, I'm getting a white label error. Maybe JSON. No. I maybe have to reload or restart the application. It's that's one negative thing about like server and backend and front end. Front end work is kind of quick and it's a rapid development because you don't have to reload. It's not very sluggish, and it's immediate. Everything you do is immediate. But in backend, there's some things that are so deep in the configuration phase that you need to restart the entire application to have them work. So changing URL mappings is one of them. Controller methods, on the other hand, are not one of them. So there I could like say, okay, so def my method and then render okay, or okay my method. And then I could also point it here, my method, and let's see. Actually, now this makes it a little bit easier to understand. Now the URL, my URL, is going to output the string okay my method if everything goes right. Let's see. It has to just restart the application now. I'm thinking also maybe we have to maybe look also at restrictions for access. But let's see first if this works. Well, now I don't have to suffix JSON, right? Well, I'm getting something, but I'm not getting what I'm asking for. Let's see. Okay, now we get it. Okay, my method. Okay, my method I'm getting. So the first thing I think was just the current user being queried. Okay, so now I'm getting okay my method, and it's working. So now I've told the server to do the same as we did in the Angular routes. Mapping a URL to a specific action and controller. So this is using the keywords action and controller. But in the original case, what I've shown you here in the URL mappings as it was before, those weren't used, action and controller. Another keyword was used, which is view. And the keyword view points to a specific view that I actually can't control click onto, which is the index. Now, where do I find these? In the same named views folder. So going to a specific view renders out just some HTML stuff. Well, actually a HTML with a little bit of extra functionality, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So this view /index is actually found immediately under the views folder and then the index GSP. The same way you could reference any other view also. If I wanted to output this, let's go for this one, I could say I want to go under slash application, application slash index. So it's the same. It's like basically you can say a folder structure here. So this slash index points onto the index GSP. You can see also that the extension is omitted. So it doesn't specifically say GSP. It just says index. All right, so what we see here is our index GSP, which is rendering some stuff. We have a title here where there is some code happening. We can look at that in a little bit. We have some meta attribute. We have some inline style. Then we have 2 CSS files being loaded. Then we have an icon being loaded, again with some code in here. We're going to look at it too in a little bit. Then we have a script tag, which initializes a context path variable onto the window. So this is JavaScript combined with some server side. So this is, again, server side. Anything, prefixed with the, or wrapped in this dollar and curly braces, that is code. That is server side code. And then we have something called grender, another server-side thing. So here we enter full-on server-side code right now. Here we have grender doing some sort of rendering of this templates header, whatever that is. We can look at that in a little bit. And then finally, we go into content with the UI view. So there is a bunch of, let's call it Java stuff happening. And then here is the block that tells Angular, and now I pass the job on to you. Now it's your turn, right? So this says, and the rest of this is you, Angular, right? But everything around it, everything here and here, everything wrapping this UI view, all of that is rendered by our Java server, rendered by this localhost 8080. So let's see if we can find out exactly what everything is based on looking at the code of the, just like page source code. So the page source, it's not processed by Angular, so it's not any JavaScript, so we can maybe look at it side by side. So I think this could be interesting. So let's make this onto half a screen and the other one onto half a screen. Let's see if we can find everything. All right, so we're starting out with a page import. This is apparently not here. There's an empty line here instead. Okay, so this is apparently some Java stuff. All right, let's leave it at that for now. Then we have the doc.html. Okay, we have that. Then we have the HTML with the Node.js, and okay, that's all there. We have a head. We have these 2 statements all there. And when we have a title, and here's something is rendered. Here we actually have a string, right? Here we actually have the output streamer. And this is what is being rendered by this thing here. Streamer.settings.findByName title.value. So what is this piece of code? This is Grails code. And this Grails code actually queries the database. It queries the database for a row in the table settings where the name is title. What this is called, it's called a dynamic finder. Find by name is a dynamic finder on the settings row. And settings, and now we get into the classic MVC. This is a model. Settings is a model with a bunch of values on it. So we have setting key, we have value, default value, name, description, a bunch of stuff, right? And this find by name, as you can see, it's not a method in here. It is not on this Groovy that it's a method. This class does not include this find by name method. This is a dynamic finder that is created for any Grails domain. They're called domains. Any Grails model has these dynamic finders. And these dynamic finders are called dynamic because you can make them with any value whatsoever. I could write, for instance, let me just show you to illustrate, I could write find by settings key. And then I can find a single one by settings key. Let's illustrate. Find by, and you can see already, IntelliJ knows this. IntelliJ knows about these dynamic finders, and that's why it's giving me find by ... right? Because it doesn't know which value do I want to query by. So I can now type se, and we get settings key or settings type. because these are dynamic binders. They're completely dynamic based on the variables on this Groovy domain. And it gets even crazier. I can say settings key, and then look at these. And, between, greater than, da 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 da. It's crazy. And you can, I mean, after a while they get hard to read. So you don't want to overuse them, especially if you combine many into one. So in this case, if I would say find by settings key and title, or what was it, name? No, name. Now I could query by two things. So I could say find by settings key, some key, comma, title. And now it would be like an AND query in MySQL. It would query where settings key equals some key and name equals title, right? And then it would return that one setting. So these are dynamic finders, and they're pretty crazy. But all this means is it actually goes into the MySQL database in this stage. It looks for the entry where the name is title, and it outputs the value. Maybe this is a good position also to look at databases inside of IntelliJ. So IntelliJ offers this thing where you can configure local databases. So you don't have to have like phpMyAdmin and hope that it doesn't crash and whatnot, or Heidi SQL. You know, you can have everything in your IDE, which I really like. And let's look at my Streamer, local Streamer installation, which we're running against now. It's locally, of course. And let's look at the settings row, right? Because this settings model maps to the same named row if we don't specify otherwise. You can always. Grails is like convention over configuration. The convention is a model is named the same way as its equivalent row. Or not row, sorry, table. A model is named by the table, or the table is named by the model. But if you want to configure it otherwise, you can. So this is like a Grails mantra, convention over configuration. Now we have the settings domain or settings model, and from it we can think about or what's the word I'm looking for? We can induce, I guess, that there's a settings table also. So let's double click on this one, and we should get all records in that table. And here we have it, 10 records in that table. And here somewhere should be one where the name field is populated with title. And here we have it. We have one where the name field is populated with title. And in my case, it says, let's see what the value is. So the value is streamer, right? So it looks for the name streamer and outputs the value. So the value is streamer. So the column value reads streamer, which is why the actual result is also streamer. If I would rename this to streamer exclamation point and save this, so it's persisted in the database, and reload this, we have all of a sudden streamer exclamation point, right? So this is actually database stuff. All right, so let's go back to streamer regular. Okay, so this is this part explained. Let's close things down again. So this is this title explained. Then we have the meta, and that's the same. And then we have the style, seems to be the same. And then we are loading two source assets, vendor CSS and application CSS. But holy crap, what's happening here? There's no vendor CSS here. If I even look for vendor.css, well, I find it actually, interestingly enough, but there's a bunch of stuff before it. And the vendor CSS, it's empty. Doesn't even have anything. It just has a bunch of like comments. So what's going on here? Well, this is something where Grails is actually really convenient. You do not actually have to update this index.jsp, which is the same, as an index HTML. It just runs your entire application, basically. You don't have to update it every time you want to add another CSS file or another JS file. There's something called the asset pipeline. And the asset pipeline takes care of these things for you. So what we could do is we could just look into the vendor CSS and see what's going on there. So as we saw here, actually, this is just a bunch of comments. But these comments, they mean something. They are like code, in a way, for this asset pipeline. And they have to follow this specific syntax. They have to follow this asterisk equals require syntax. And once you have this syntax in place, it looks for these files in these folders and adds them to it. So let's make sure that it's correct what I'm saying. So we have a bootstrap custom, right? And let's see here. The first line is bootstrap custom CSS.
Yeah.
Let's look for the next one. Ionicons, and let's find it here under Ionicons, right? So this is just a way to facilitate these things, have everything in one place, and make it also reusable. So if I wanted to use this in 2 places, not only in the index GSP, but in another place also, I could do that. And I think in this project we actually do this. We actually load the vendor CSS in 2 places, or even multiple ones. Look at this. We load it once in the no Angular GSP. We load it in the index GSP. We load it in another one called invite index GSP. In the authentication that we were on, that's the one with the inputs and here this label and the inputs, the one where you log in. So we actually reuse this CSS that's requiring all of these other CSS files multiple times. And that saves us the necessity to rewrite these lines of codes all the time and maintain these lines of codes also. If I wanted to change this to another file, instead of having to do this in 5 files, as we just saw, I have to do it only in 1. So it's pretty convenient. Now, there's one thing confusing about this, though, is where does it find this stuff? Because if I look into the root of this folder, into the entire root of the application, there's no such thing as a bootstrap custom. And even if I look with this little icon here, if I look in the folder where I am with the vendor CSS, inside of this folder, there's also no bootstrap custom. What's going on here? Where's this stuff? Well, again, Grails is doing some magic for us. And it's maybe sometimes a little bit bad that it does it this way because you don't really know what's going on. But once you learn it, it's actually kind of convenient. It starts at this assets folder, right? So Grails app assets. At this assets folder, it starts to look for this bootstrap folder. It knows that this is a directory, seeing as this is the path. So it looks for this bootstrap directory. It cannot find it though. And if it cannot find it, it traverses inside of each of these subfolders. So it looks in here, and here it is. It finds it here. And then it looks in there for this file, and it found it. And once it finds it, it stops, and it outputs it, and then it's good, right? But that's how it does it. So it looks inside of these nested paths. I could go ahead and I could move this. So let's give you an example here. I'm going to open this file up, and I have all this CSS now, right? This is output from this bootstrap custom.
Yes.
Let's move this over to style sheets. The entire bootstrap thing. I just moved it over. So now this custom CSS is found under another path. It's found under assets style sheet bootstrap. But we don't change anything. We let the assets URL be the same. Assets/bootstrap CSS. This should be the same. And let's refresh and see if it still works. If it broke. It still works. So this is magic, right? This is weird. But that's great. That's the Grails asset pipeline. It just, based on this URL, it doesn't actually look inside of your directory of the project. It has an internal logic where it fires off some code, and that code traverses and looks inside of these folders. So this is important, that not always does what you expect to see, especially when it comes to paths, does not need to reflect what is actually in your working directory. And while we're on the subject of asset pipelining, let's talk about these weird TPL prefix, suffix things. Why are all the views referenced as, let's go on to the routes again. Why are all the views referenced as just player HTM, but they're actually called player TPL HTM? All right, again, what's going on here? And also, while we're on the subject, why is it referencing /streama/player HTM? But in here, it's somewhere completely different. It's under JavaScript streamer templates player.tpl.htm. So if we look at how would we build it, let's open up a text editor and how would we build this URL if we were just just thinking plainly? Well, we would build it up as, at the very least, let's copy reference. Wait a second. So let's do copy path. At the very least, we would do something like this. I mean, okay, maybe not the very least, but that's like the maximum, right? So this is like the path that we would expect, kind of. But okay, we can probably deal with, now that we know that the assets pipeline does some stuff, we can probably deal with something like this and maybe even something like this, right? Because assets pipeline, it does some weird stuff. So it looks like under subfolders. But still, we expect something like this. But what's reality? Reality is /schema/player.htm. What's going on here? This has nothing to do with the original folder structure. What's actually going on here is that the assets pipelining is using a cache, a JavaScript cache. You may know that JavaScript can be easily cached by the browser. Documents in HTML, on the other hand, not as easily. So in order to cache this properly, all of this, and on another thing, JavaScript can be concatenated. I don't know if you know the word concatenated, but concatenation just means that multiple JavaScript files are put into one file. And then there's another keyword, which is minification. So JavaScript can be minified. It can be concatenated and it can be minified. Minification means that it's just this one garbled big JavaScript mess that you can't even read anymore, but that's super, super tiny. Let me just give you an example of this. Let's go on to Königsteiner Center, which is, I think, unminified. Let's make sure that I'm saying the right things here. No, okay, it's minified. All right, sorry. So this is also minified. So you can see, it's all just one big garbled mess. You can't even decipher any of this JavaScript code. And it's one file also. Yeah, it's vendor and then JS. It's one single file, and the other one is just another big single file. But I'm promising you that nobody programs in this one single large file. Instead, we all have them in multiple files, but in production code, they get concatenated. They get put together into one large file and then minified as well. Now, let me show you real quick, because this is kind of cool. In this other project that we did, these lines here and these lines up here, right? There is this thing where there's a bunch of HTML. Let's just scroll over a little bit. A bunch of HTML, div, and let's see if there's more that we can. There's a label, right? There's a bunch of HTML added into this JavaScript code. And this is added into this thing called template cache. And this is something that Angular provides. Angular provides a way to say, you can specify your own name for it. It can be anything. You can fake a route if you want. In this case, it's basically like a URL. /kcenter /URL share /private /. It fakes, in a way, it fakes a URL. And it says, and put that into the template cache. And whenever I request this as a template URL, again, just Angular internally, whenever I request this as a template URL, instead give me this HTML output. And this makes it possible to load everything into this template cache. And this makes it possible to minify and to concatenate and to increase performance of your website. That's really all that it's for. It just increases performance of the website so that everything is not loaded on the fly and slows down your performance and slows down the user experience. So in development, though, we don't concatenate. As you can see, everything is single files. JS. We have all kinds of different files. And that's a good thing, because that way we can debug more easily. So in development mode, nothing gets concatenated. In production mode, things are concatenated and minified. And that's good that way. So what is it with this weird template cache? So there's a plugin called the Angular assets pipeline. So it's not the assets pipeline, the regular one, the one that takes care of, what we just saw in the vendor CSS. What was it? Vendor CSS. This one here with the require. But it's one on top of that takes care of specific Angular stuff. Very specific Angular stuff. And this specific Angular thing does the following logic. It looks for a templates folder anywhere inside of the JavaScript folder. So it requires a few things. It requires that there's an assets folder. It requires that in the assets folder, there's a JavaScript folder. And then once that is done, it looks for any templates directory and puts any HTML file or TPL, really TPL HTML. This is also important why there's a TPL in each of them. It looks for any TPL HTML file and adds them to its template cache. And it does so with the following, with like a convention. It puts them in the module, in the Angular module name, slash, and then its same name omitting the TPL. So this is kind of strange, but it omits the TPL because it really, the developers of that plugin, they basically said, look guys, we need some way to differentiate between a template that you want to access in some other way that you use to debug, and then another template that you really want to add to the template cache. So anything that you really want to add to the template cache with our plugin, put the TPL in there. We'll take it out again for you, so it's not so like ugly, you know, but put the TPL in there so we put it into the template cache. So that's why it's here, it's there, but once in runtime, they take it out, right?
Yeah.
And then this other thing where they do the /streamer / media detail, this little part here is they just need some way to prefix them. Because if they would just put this and they wouldn't prefix them at all, if I would create another module and I would have a similarly named HTM or even same named HTM, then it would crash and it wouldn't work anymore. So it needs some way to know where to put this. And it actually does this by way of folder naming convention. They assume that the folder that the templates directory is inside of is also the name of the module. And in our case, we adhered to this convention and we did the same thing. We created an Angular module named Streamer, placed it into the folder Streamer, and inside of it we had the templates. This would mean that if I would create a directory and call it foo, and inside of that directory I would create a templates directory, and inside of that templates directory I would create a file called my.html.tpl.htm, and it contains just an h1 saying hello world. That this my.html TPL HTM should now be added to the template cache. Let's see if that is actually the case. My HTM. Let's see, why is that the case? Why is that the case? Oh, I know. Wait a second. I know. So we have to tell it also actually to look here. So it wasn't correct what I said that it just looks in any of them. We need to tell it to traverse this and look in this directory. The easiest way to do that right now, just like a hack way, is to just point it here in this require, and I'll show you later what this is all about. But let's just go and say ... So we go out one, we say foo, and then we say templates. I hope that works. Let's see. And there we have it. Okay. So let's assume I'll just explain this part to you in a little bit. But for now, we've seen that now that we've told it to look in this templates directory, it went ahead and it put our hello world into the template cache in this location, inheriting the foo from this directory, assuming also that we would create an Angular module called foo, which we haven't though. So we can't even use this now. If I were to try to use this, it would give me an exception where it says it cannot find Angular module foo. I would have to first create this module. In the case of Streamer.js, we actually do this. We create a module, and then we require this templates directory, and then all the templates that are added onto Streamer know that this module already exists. So this is a requirement for this, and that's why we have this requirement also to follow this very, very strict convention, naming convention for these folders, for these controllers, for these templates. It's a very, very strict convention, and it's done not by Angular, it's done by Grails. It's done by these asset pipelines. And it's a pretty good convention, to be honest. It taught us a lot about scaling these applications and making them larger. And now if we look back onto KCenter, one of our largest projects, we see that the convention here is that we have a KCenter project, but inside of it we have a submodule called URL share, and then we have a submodule called private. And we can assume that there's a folder structure also that is KCenter, and inside of it we have a folder called URL share, and inside of it we have a folder called private, and in there this module is first created. Right? We can assume that because this is just the way that these Grails applications require the structure. And it's kind of neat because that means that if you switch from Grails to Grails to Grails application, you can expect the same kind of structure everywhere. So one last thing, though, that's important is these template caches. This means that this is not an actual URL. And here we again have the discrepancy between what we assume is an actual URL because it looks like one and what we see in our directory for the development. It's actually, there's a disconnect. It is not the same. And that is a little bit confusing, but it actually, in the end, when you learn about it, it makes a lot of sense. And let's just give you one example to illustrate how very important the template cache is here. Because there is no .htm file or tpl.htm that we can ever access. These are never exposed to the outside world. There is no path that I could enter in this URL that makes it output this specific HTML. And that's actually kind of good because that means that it's kind of secure in a way almost, right? Because you can't ever just get this center piece. It's not like an iframe or something. You can't ever just get this center HTML just by itself. Let me illustrate why and how that is. So let's go into the routes one more time, and let's do some adjustment. Let's say instead of calling streamer and dash and TPL, let's actually say let's call TPL here, and
Yes.
let's do some other stuff. Let's make it a little bit more logical. Let's go into assets. We can start with a slash, sure, why not? And then we say streamer, and then we say templates, and then we say dash TPL, right? So this could work. Maybe we should just for clarity's sake also say JavaScript. Anyway, this is a test case and it's anyway not going to work because I want to illustrate something. But I want to show you something. So what we now are going to see is that it's actually in the network tab. It's going to look for this template. It's going to look for this dash TPL HTM and it's going to return a 404. It looked for it via an XHR request because this is how Angular could work. You could actually put an HTML file somewhere and it could load it, theoretically. So theoretically, let's do that for a second here. I could go into source. I think it's right here. It's source and then web app. I think that's how it works. And then I just put some HTML file, test.html. I think I can do that. And then, right. So I think now if I would go into localhost./8080 slash test.html. No, don't exact. Okay, I don't remember exactly what I have to do to make it, but this is like a public folder almost. So you can put like actual stuff that you wanna one-to-one output. You could put txt files and stuff in there. I could, speak to an actual URL here, but oh, you know what I could do? Does it still exist? My URL thing that I did? No, it doesn't exist anymore, right? Because I could put, like my URL and stuff in there. Is there some other thing I could do? Oh, you know what? Didn't we have this auth thing that I could do? Or invite slash. Okay, so here we have. Oh. What's happening here? Ooh, it's breaking. I broke it. Okay, I was just gonna take some valid URL for a template, but it doesn't make any sense to do that now. But the idea, you get the gist of it. I could load an HTML in here. If I would in the preview get some HTML, it could render it in here because that's, template URL, that's how it works. But in our case, there is no place where these are actually served out. So this entire path is just a fake string, really. And if I would call, and that's something I could do to illustrate, I think. I could call, so let me just fix it again. So the dashboard looks okay. And I broke it again. Why did I break it? Because the TPL is still in there. All right. Let's see. Let's reload. All right. First of all, note, by the way, that it doesn't actually request the HTML. What it requests is or it doesn't on the fly either. So for instance, if I would switch away and into the dashboard again, if I search through these now, it doesn't actually look for the dash.htm in any way. Yeah. So this is interesting because it doesn't load the HTML on the fly, and because it's in the template cache. Instead, what we can see when we load the page initially, all of these template cache files are loaded. And remember concatenation, of course, in production it wouldn't be that way. But here we have this dash.js, which does this template cache put on this path. So yeah, again, really, this is just a path. And what I could do is I could run this piece of code, I believe, and just put something custom on there and then load it in. I don't know what the point of that would be, but yeah, just to give you an idea, you could put some custom stuff onto this template cache under any sort of string. You know what? I'm just going to do it. I think that makes sense. So I'm going to go into the dash controller. Oh no, the front end dash controller. So dash controller, and I'm just gonna put something my TPL, I'm gonna call it. So the template cache I need to require, Angular require stuff. And I'm gonna put into here just one H1 that says hello world. All right, so now I put something on the template cache now. And now what I can do is I can say in the dash TPL, I could call something which is like the really, really basic rendering of templates. It's just a div, and it's an ng include. Yeah, I think that's what it's called. Yeah, ng include. And in this ng include, I can reference a template string. And here I could just say my TPL. And now in this div, if I didn't do anything wrong now, it would render this hello world. Let's see if this works. I hope this works. No, what is that? Let's see. Let's debug. Where did I even put this? Oh, I put it inside of like new releases. Wait a second. Well, that's not a good idea. Who knows if I even get in there? It's because there's like an ng if, right? And that means there's a specific requirement for this entire block.
Ah.
So that's not a good idea. So let's put it outside and let's see if hopefully. There we go. So putting something custom onto any custom string, it's really just a string. This first part is really just a string. And then putting any HTML there, you can use it with something like ng include or the routes. It's the same thing. You can just put it onto the routes as well. And then instead of calling streama-htm, you call my TPL. Now, in our case, it doesn't make any sense because I'm starting it in the dash controller, but you get the gist, right? And that's kind of confusing because it looks so much like an URL, and it kind of can be found under there. So streama-htm, you can sort of find it there, but it's under templates and it's called -tpl-htm. And that's why instead of searching all the way and all around, I actually just go ahead and I copy this and I do shift and I do -tpl and I'm done with it, right? Then I just find it. And so it's easier that way, but sometimes there's confusion when there's multiple HTML files named in the same fashion. In this case, I don't have an actual duplicate, but it can happen. And if that's the case, then you have to dig a little bit and you have to find exactly where these things are. But as they follow this convention, this module, and then omitting the TPL, omitting the templates directory, things are a little bit easier to understand. All right. Any questions?
No.
Okay. Do you want a break?
You can go on.
All right. Okay, so let's look at this stuff. This requires stuff. There's something pretty cool going on here, and we have come to really use it very intensely. There are 3 keywords to keep in mind. There's the require self, there's the require tree, and then the single require. These 3 are all important. And these 3 are important both in JS files and in CSS files. So in CSS files, we have a very, very similar structure. We have require tree, although it's not used here, and we have the require self, which is also not used here. The differences in the syntax is the commenting, right? Commenting works different in JS as it works in CSS. So in CSS, you have this kind of commenting, and in JS, you have this / commenting. But everything else is pretty much the same. And again, this is the asset pipeline that's doing this. So this is a Grails functionality. This is Grails asset pipelining that's allowing this. This is not Angular. This is not pure vanilla Java. This is not just Grails or Groovy. This is a specific plugin, the asset pipeline plugin that's doing this. The same one that is telling it that's telling it to look for Bootstrap under Bower Bootstrap or under JavaScript, where you can just move things around, where it looks recursively. It's that very, very same plugin. And that same plugin does something pretty neat. It makes it possible for you to say you want to require an entire tree of stuff. And what it does, it recursively goes through directory and directory and directory as deep as you want and looks for everything and just includes everything. And in theory, that could mean that we can just require one single JS file, or in our case, this streamer.js, and I could say in here, require tree for the entire streamer folder, yeah, theoretically, and it would just load everything.
Okay.
And that's cool. And that would make it so that in our index.jsp, if we go back to our index.jsp, where it down here loads all the JavaScript, instead of loading, just the streamer.js, which is really just this little bitty code right here, and then all these comments up top, instead of loading all of these, it loads a bunch of these files instead. Let's look at that in our code view, in our source code view. So let's go onto the GSP again, just to compare and contrast. So, right, we talked about all these CSS and all these CSS files. We've talked about them. And then here we have the script block. And we haven't talked about grender. Okay, we can do that at some other point. But really, it's just the same. It's like a template for Grails. So it's really nothing special. It's just some HTML that's being rendered at this state point. So it's just some refactoring. Yeah, maybe we don't even need to talk about it any further than that. It's just some HTML that you can put in different places and refactor out that way. So that's that part here. This header, and where does it end? Here it ends. And then you have this block right here, which again, it kicks off Angular. But then under that, we in the code only specified 2 single JS files to include. But in the source code, a bunch of stuff is loaded, right? You can see it's like crazy much stuff. And instead of having to write all of this stuff by hand, especially, where it gets really annoying is all these template cache stuff. Yeah. Instead of actually writing them all by hand, this template folder, for instance, and all the files inside of it are very, very nicely included with this single line of code, require tree templates. It says that based on this JS file where it is, so this is right here, look for the templates directory that's next to it. So right here, right here. And then require tree, so everything inside of it. If we had a directory in here now, it would also require that. So we could do that theoretically. We could say, so some blah, and then, I don't know, test.js. I'm putting a JS file now because it's expecting JS files really. But let's reload and now it should also have like test.js. You see right here. So now it goes recursive. It even goes through directories. But since that is it doesn't even work with the template cache, putting them into template cache, because, as you've heard, as you've learned, it looks for this directory, this outside directory, and it expects a module for that. If you put something inside of the templates directory, a subdirectory in there, nothing functions anymore. It sort of it ignores it completely. So that's something that should be omitted. And instead, this should be like a flat structure. But this is convention. I'm just showing you, first of all, what's possible. And what's possible is to have subdirectories, and all of these are included, which is kind of intense. But there's some nice stuff about it also, because there are projects where we actually have to write all of these things by hand. We have to specify, when they're not Grails projects, from experience with other projects, you have to specify which files you want to include, with JS files, which, CSS files. And having this required tree structure actually, it facilitates stuff very, very much. But why is it that we did so much stuff? Why didn't we just say, so this is now a question, about why did the star do it a specific way? Why didn't we just write required tree dot slash streamer, let's say, right? So I'm just saying require this entire tree of files and then just taking everything else away. Why didn't we do it like that? And there's a specific reason for that. And that is that Angular needs a very specific order for their JavaScript stuff to work. Angular needs JavaScript code to be executed in a specific order in order to function correctly. And the most important one that needs to come first is the Angular itself. So the Angular JS library itself needs to come first of all. Then need to come all of the extensions that you want to add. They need to be preloaded into the application. All of the JS that are sort of requirements for your application to run. So, Angular Sanitize, Angular Translate, Angular Bootstrap, what else is Angular? Angular UI Slider, Angular Local Storage. So there are a bunch of Angular stuff. So these are all Angular plugins, and they need to be added between AngularJS, so between the main AngularJS and the and your custom Angular modules, your code, your Angular code. And then finally comes your Angular code, and your Angular code also needs to be in a specific order. Namely, the primary module, say if that's your only module and it doesn't have any dependencies inside of itself, needs to come top. It needs to come first. And then comes the stuff that requires this module. What do I mean by this? The primary module creates a module by saying, this is actually harder to read than, so on the left side it's easier to read. It creates a module with this constructor method, angular.module. It takes a string and it takes an array. And this constructor, module, string, array, creates our first module and creates the module with these dependencies. So if we don't take these right now into consideration, then all of these are public things. They are all like, let's see if we can find them all. So here we have Angular UI router. Here we have Angular Bootstrap, ng file upload. Oh Jesus! I don't know if I can find that now. File. There we have it. Ng file upload. All right. So these are all Angular stuff, and they're loaded based on this Angular being there, and then initializing themselves in their own code. And we require all of these. And then we run our own code. We say, okay, now create this module, and then any subsequent files are allowed to use this module. If I would turn this order around, in any sort of fashion, let's see, for instance, this API service, right? It uses Angular module streamer. It uses it, being just this, calling this method with just a string is using it as a getter, and calling it with a string and an array is a setter, as you may already know. So these use them, and that's very, very important that the order then is correct, that first this code is executed where the module is created, and then the code is executed where the module is used. That's very important. If I would change this order, everything would break. Let's illustrate. Let's break it. Easiest way to break it is actually just changing the order of these things. So here, let me re-include this. Here we have a require self declaration. So I told you about these three keywords, right? Require self, and require tree. Requires a single file. Require self executes this code or places this JS file in that execution point. Yeah? And then comes all the required tree in our case. So let's just take this and put it under here. That would mean that all of these files are included first, the services, controllers, directives, get executed, get executed at this stage, and then the module is created. And as you can imagine, this will break everything. So now we have, it doesn't even load. We have 80 exceptions in the console. I mean, this is just breaking now. So, and basically all of them say the same thing. They all say module streamer is not available, right? So it's just the order's wrong. So That's why we don't just say require tree everything. That's why we have to specify in what order things are required. And that's why this is cool that they allow us this, that this module makes it easy to require an entire directory. If all of them are the same way, all of these service methods, none of them have like seniority or priority. None of them have to be required first because none of them require each other. They're all just like playing along on this Angular module and just requiring this Angular module really. So these can all be required in an arbitrary order, whichever order this comes in. Yeah, if this is different every time the page loads, fine, that doesn't matter. But this order, this require self being before the require tree, that is very relevant. And this is what this asset pipeline allows. Now, what this asset pipeline also allows, and where things get a little bit complicated, is it allows a recursive require declaration structure. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that we could have more of these blocks of code, this require block, inside of any of these files. And that in itself kicks off another require phase. So let me illustrate that to you by opening this file. The star core does this, There's a star core. So really all we're saying, let's go through it step by step. The index GSP is saying, okay, now load this file, the streamer.js. But it doesn't load it in the browser, right? It just tells the asset pipeline to look at it first. So the asset pipeline, asset.java::JavaScript. So the asset pipeline, the plugin, goes in that file and it looks and it goes, oh, I have to do stuff. And it looks, okay, I have to require this file in this location. It looks for it under assets. And then it looks for it, first in Bower. It looks if there's a star folder. There is not. All right. Then it looks in images. Okay, there's no star folder. Then it looks under JavaScript, and it finds a Zastaro folder. All right? It looks in that Zastaro folder for a core folder. It finds it. It looks for that core folder for a Zastaro.core directory or file. It doesn't care. It finds a file, and there we have a file. And then instead of just loading that file plainly, again, it looks, okay, and what do I have to do in this file? And it looks again, okay, we have some require self, all right, so execute this code, all right? So then we have a require tree, services. It looks for a services directory, doesn't find one, so it ignores it. That's kind of convenient. If we ever want to create a services directory, we can just do it and we can add a bunch of files and everything works. We don't have to ever declare that service directory was added after the fact or now should be added. We can just create this structure that we always have. It's the same structure. It's like, again, convention, right? This is the convention that we follow. So we can just copy paste basically this require tree in every new module that we create. And then we can, but don't have to, create this directory structure. And if we don't, all the better. No more files to require. So it looks for this directory, doesn't find one. All right. Goes on, looks for controllers, doesn't find one. All right, looks for directives, finds the file or finds the folder and includes all the files. And so on and so forth, right? So, and this could go on and on and on. If I were to have now inside of this UIS carousel another of the same thing, it would just continue and continue and continue. Right?
Okay.
So, but this kind of mapping is created not every time you reload the page. This kind of mapping is created when the code changes or when the application starts. So you don't have to worry about that. For us as developers, it's immediate. So if I would change something, it would immediately reflect it in the in the output. But it's not actually something that the user feels when he reloads the page, because it's something that is on initialization of the application or on resource reloading. So if the Java code is reloaded based on some watcher internally. So we don't have to worry about performance in this case. But yeah, so this is how this works, how this structure works. And we have some projects where this gets really, really complicated. But as long as you understand require self, require tree, and require, and how they can, kick each other off, you're good to go. Yeah. All right. Any questions?
Not so far, thank you.
All right. So I think there's more we should talk about. But like, for instance, this wrap thing. But there's also documentation about that. I can link you some stuff. But I think this was very useful. And I hope
Yes.
that if you have any questions, you can just let me know, and I'll try to answer them as best I can. All right.
Yeah, thank you.